The Book of Remembrance of Moses, the Tablet of Gabriel, Chapter 4. An account of Isaac and Rebekah having twin sons, and of the blessings of Jacob and Esau. An account of Jacob going to Haran and working to marry Rachel, and of her death. Jacob establishing that the law of Jeshurun would be built into all things, and what that means. An account of the murder of Shechem and of Joseph in Egypt, and Jacob's last words of advice to his children. When we approached to use the Urim again, the adversary was hard against me, and he did not want us to see the vision, because we were seeing many things that Belial wanted to remain in obscurity. And I came to this next scribe session very determined that the Lord would help me overcome this fierce opposition. And when the vision came, I would not take time to hesitate, but kept reciting what was before me with the vision, for fear of losing it. And it was hard for the scribes to keep up, but they were able to record it all. And I began to see Isaac, and he is very young, and he has been cared for and nursed by many in his infancy. And as he grew, he was strong and robust, and he loved his father. But Abraham worried about Isaac, because he lost his mother when he was very young. And Abraham began to watch Isaac to see if he could be the next son of salvation. And as he grew, he was taught righteousness and all the skills of his father. And when it was time for Isaac to find a wife, Abraham was hesitant to see him out, for he feared he may be delayed in returning back home. And he asked a friend to come before him to see if he would give him assistance in selecting a wife for Isaac. And the man was a trusted friend, and he came to see Abraham, and he will be a hireling. And I see him kneeling before Abraham, putting his left hand behind the right thigh of Abraham. And Abraham is asking him to find a wife for Isaac, and only the one that Anokeesed directs. And this is an interesting use of the hand that I have not seen before. And the hand is on the thigh, because the thigh feels the strength of one's walk with Anokeesed upon the earth, with one's fellows, and so the hireling is making a covenant to be obedient to the request of Abraham. And the hands are used in many ways in relation to making covenants, and just like Abraham's two hands were placed upon the sacred writings of the tablet of Gabriel, and his mother's hands over his, she was having him covenant before Anokeesed. And any covenant made with your hands on sacred writing is a covenant made before Anokeesed. And when your hands are used for making a covenant of kinship, the palm is pierced on the hands of the two making the covenant, and then their hands are pressed together, so that blood can flow between them, signifying their kinship. And when you use your hands to make a covenant to tell the truth, you put your hand on your chest, or raise it up for all to see. And this servant covenanted to be obedient to the request of Abraham, and Abraham was well satisfied. And it came to pass that the hireling set out to go to the land of Haran, and Abraham provided the means for him to go, and for his sustenance. And there he found Rebekah, and she was like a shining light in the midst of darkness. And all that occurred there in their meeting was led by the hand of Anokeesed. And she would have the sanctity of marriage, and it was agreed upon. And the hireling set out for home with his prize. And when they arrived, she was everything Isaac and Abraham had hoped for. And Isaac was all she ever dreamed of finding. But Isaac had some behaviors that displeased Abraham, and he would have the heat of anger and be unpleasant at times. And Abraham knew from his mother's counsel the importance of finding the next son of salvation, and finding the correct one in the eyes of Anokeesed was part of his covenant. And in the midst of all these things, I see that Isaac's life was the most normal of any of his family in terms of happiness and stability and the sanctity of marriage. And Rebekah came to be with child while she and Isaac were still young, and Abraham had not identified Isaac as the next son of salvation. And he pondered all this carefully in his heart and with the Lord. And Rebekah gave birth to Jacob and Esau. And before the birth, Rebekah said, I have a battle going on inside me, because the boys were so active, and it seemed to be too crowded in there. And when Jacob came out to breathe his first breath, they beheld that his hip was out of joint, and he was crippled. But Esau was healthy and very active, and as they grew, Jacob went past the time to learn to walk. And he appears to be about 4 or 5 years old, and he is severely crippled. And I see him with the Urim before me, and he has a rag tied around his knee, so he can lift his leg with his hand to take a step. And his mother works with him endlessly to teach him to walk. And she binds his hip around his waist with a wrapping to hold his hip in place. Reference 62. Strong's number 7259. Her name, Rebekah, means to bind up with a cloth. And for most of his youth, Jacob must lift his leg with a cloth to take a step, and as he grew, if he was very careful, his hip would begin to stay in place because of the binding, and he had to slowly pick his way. And it came to pass that the time for the boys' coming of age arrived, and there had been a growing dispute about the blessings for the boys, and during this dispute, Abraham sought the answer to the matter with the Urim, as it is written on the tablet of Gabriel. And this was the first time Abraham had used the tablet, and he saw marvelous things for Jacob, and he learned about the sacred pathway his mother spoke of, and he was inspired by the truth of the law of Jeshurun, and it changed his life forever. And for the first time he could more fully comprehend what his mother had done for him, and with his view in the Urim, he found his vision fully, and he became more determined than ever to live by the law. And then he knew that Jacob was the next son of salvation. And Abraham rejoiced at the magnitude of the vision of Jacob. And in this way it was plain that Jacob was indeed the next son of salvation, notwithstanding his being crippled. And Abraham discerned properly that Jacob, being crippled, was come to him because of the war against his vision in Jeshurun. But Isaac refused to bless Jacob as the next son of salvation because he was crippled, and he pointed out that it was his covenant hip, like Abraham used with his hireling, that was crippled, and Isaac viewed this as a sign that Jacob was unfit to have such a blessing. So here was this little son, and the war from Shakath descended down upon him with all its fury. And after long discussions and negotiations and many words to implore on behalf of Jacob, it was decided that Isaac would bless Esau and Abraham would bless Jacob. And Isaac was young, and being an only child and never having to compromise, he was set in his ways. And Abraham succeeded in bringing about preserving what he beheld with Urim by his walking in the way of peace, when it was according to his covenant with Anokeesed before his mother, that he should always negotiate peacefully any issue that needed settled. And in this case he accomplished it. And it came to pass that on the day of their ceremony of coming of age, both sons were blessed with an acceptable blessing in the eyes of Anokeesed and the parents of the boys. And Abraham blessed Jacob with a prayer and a blessing, and he sang a long song of prophetic insight. Reference number 63. Read Jubilees, chapter 22. And by these things brought forth by Urim, and by the wisdom and skill of Abraham and Rebekah, the powers of evil were shaken to their core, and Jacob received his proper blessing. And Esau was angry, and he said, Why would a cripple be blessed in this manner? You should cast him out. He is good for nothing. He cannot go hunting. He cannot gather food. No one will ever marry him. How can he pass on his half of our grandfather's inheritance? The inheritance will be wasted on him. Cast him out, and he will starve. Now this kind of disturbance in the family had never happened before, and everyone was shaken by this outburst. And Rebekah and Abraham each sought the Lord in the matter, and they offered consoling words to Esau to calm him. And when some years had passed, they decided to send Jacob to Haran to find his wife. And when the time came for Jacob to see his 20th year, preparations began for his journey, and Esau mocked him again. And he said, How can he travel? He cannot even walk or sit upon a donkey. What foolishness is this?" And Rebekah was afraid because of the mockery, and it seemed to her that it could be true. And she said to Abraham, "I have changed my mind. I do not want him to go. Why can't we use a hireling like you did for me?" But Abraham was wise, and because of what he had seen with Urim, he knew the desires of Anokeesed, and he said, he must go forth to prove himself because of the war that will be coming upon his soul by the powers of evil. And I saw that Jacob could not sit astride a donkey, but must sit sideways because of his hip. And they made a special saddle for him to sit sideways upon a donkey. And Abraham knew the journey well, and he drew on parchment to show trail of the way to Haran. And he informed Jacob which places he must gather grass for his donkeys, and such places to stop and rest, and where to get water. And he said, "The hardest part of the journey is 3 days across barren lands, and sometimes there is a place called the Middle Oasis that has water, but I have inquired from travelers, and they say that right now the water is dried up." And Rebekah and Abraham blessed Jacob again on the day he started out, and Rebekah's blessing is one of the sweetest blessings of a mother to ever be heard in heaven. And Esau watched his brother depart sitting sideways on his donkey and towing a pack donkey behind, and he had provisions on top, and sheaves of hay with the burdens for the donkeys. And Jacob was afraid the words of his brother's scorn would come true. And Jacob traveled northward until he came to oversee the Jordan River Valley and the Sea of Kinnereth. And he could see far into the misty distance where he must yet travel. And there came upon him a foreboding, and Jacob bowed himself in ardent prayer before Anokeesed. And he said, "O Anokeesed, I put my life and soul into your hands. If I yet live to return to this place again, I will give my life to you, and devote all that I am to bring to your people the ministry of a son of salvation. I ask not for riches or material gain, but only for the opportunity to serve you, to make you happy and well satisfied with my service." And it came to pass that in the night the Lord caused Jacob to dream, and he saw a holy pathway to heaven. Reference number 64, the law of Jeshurun. And on one side of it were 12 men, and were the sons of Yaatsekawd, but he did not know who they were. And on the other side 12 more faces, and they were his 12 sons, but he knew them not, for he was not married, and had no thought of ever having children. And the Spirit of the Lord was strong in the dream, and it lingered in the morning, and for the first time Jacob felt that he could make the journey and return safely. And he named the place Bethel, reference number 65, number 1008, and said, "This is the house of Anokeesed." And he anointed a rock of witness for a remembrance of his vow, and to remember where he communed with the Lord. And in the morning, while it was still cool, he set out on his journey, and for some he was an amusing sight, to see a young man sitting sideways on a donkey and leading it with one hand, and towing a pack donkey with the other, and he had his head covered according to the ways of the people there. And his journey went well, because the Lord protected him in the way. And I remember also the prayers of Decadarchiy, that the alliance of heaven attend to him faithfully, as a son of Abraham. And he finally arrived at the principal place of water, for the settlement of Haran, as his parchment map indicated. And the shepherds there affirmed to him that he had found the correct place. And I see him kneeling on the ground beside the well, with his face in his hands on the ground. And he is praising and thanking Anokeesed that he has arrived safely. And someone touched him on the shoulder, and he raised his head and turned to look. And it was Rachel, and she thought he might be hurt, or out of his head from thirst and fatigue. And she said, "Sir, can I help you?" And he replied, "I am all right now, because Anokeesed has brought me safely here, by the mercies of his grace." And when he said the name Anokeesed, She straightened up and looked intently at him. And she said, "Whence do you come here?" And he said, "From the camp of Abraham." And she knew well the meaning of the name Anokeesed, and something touched her heart because she was aware that only the family of Melchizedek used the name Anokeesed in those days. And she presented him to her father Laban, and told him that she found him at the place of water. And as I look at him gazing upon Jacob, who was crippled and disheveled from his long journey, I see a terrible smile upon his face, and he spat to the glory side, which since ancient times has been a demonstration of disgust, and he is thinking, they sent me a cripple here to find him a wife, because they cannot find one for him, and I have just the wife. And in his mind he thought of Leah, for Leah was an albino, and she has light blue eyes, and cannot have the bright light of the sun shine upon them. And no one would marry her, and in this way Laban acted deceitfully from the start, and he did not disclose his intentions. And it came to pass that during this visit, Jacob went with Rachel to tend the sheep, and they became acquainted, and they spoke together of Anokeesed. And he brought her all the news of Salem and Hebron. And he was very personable and gentle in all his ways, like his grandfather Abraham. And all the men in Haran were rough and boisterous. And it came about that they became good friends, and were always to be seen together. And Jacob approached Laban, and asked him if he could marry Rachel. And he said, "I desire to have Rachel for my wife. May I serve you for the customary year?" And Laban laughed and said, "What good can you do me? For you it will be 7 years." And he did not know that Jacob was a very skilled herdsman. And Jacob knew how to assist the sheep at lambing time. And he knew from his family heritage since ancient times many healing herbs to apply to the sheep when they were sick or injured, and his soul was joined with the sheep. And he could look at them and tell when they were afraid or about to deliver. And he knew how to lead them to still waters. And I am sure it did not occur to Laban that the name Rachel means a female sheep. Reference number 66. Strong's number 7353 and 7354. And it would be a language of glory to those who followed the old way to know that they were rightful companions. And so to the surprise of Laban, he was agreeable to 7 years' service. And Jacob prospered Laban's sheep, and he was faithful as a servant and a hireling, and he dealt wisely with the other servants, and he buoyed up their spirits with his happy countenance. And in this way all Laban's household was blessed. And the Spirit of the Lord was with Jacob like water in a dry place, and it bound Rachel and Jacob together. And as the time for their betrothal approached, Jacob expected to have a wedding ceremony, as it was a strong tradition among the people of the family of Shem. And Rachel told him that her father would do no such thing, and he would not want to demonstrate that women had so high a status as to be associated with men as their equals in marriage. Reference number 67. Weddings signified to them equality in marriage. Even a wicked man like Laban saw it that way. And it came to pass that Rachel persuaded her father to have a grand feast to celebrate his posterity under the hands of Jacob, and that would be the time she would become his wife. And Laban agreed to do so, but in his heart he was jealous of Jacob's success, and he continued in his deceit. And after the feast was over, he detained Rachel much to her anguish, and in the darkness of the night he sent Leah in to Jacob, and Jacob did not know it was Leah until morning. And Jacob was very much embarrassed before Leah, and he went in to Laban, and he said, "Laban, why have you deceived me thus?" And Laban said, "I think you and Leah match each other. The two of you go well together." And he laughed and spat to the glory side. But Rachel broke away and came in upon Jacob and Laban talking, and she stomped her feet and said, "No, father, I am his rightful rib." And Laban was caught off guard and was much surprised that his daughter was so forward, and he said, "After 1 week you can join him, but he must work 7 years more." And Laban knew that he prospered under Jacob's service, and he took credit for it himself. And people came from round about to learn from Jacob how to care for sheep according to the old ways, and his reputation as an excellent shepherd spread. And he was also known as the shepherd, who rode on donkeys sitting sideways. So it is plain to me to see that the war on Jacob was heavy upon him, and he was patient in all his trials. And Asael was pleased that there was more than one wife for Jacob, and in those 7 years Leah bore him children, but Rachel did not. And Asael was sore against Rachel, because for him she represented the sanctity of marriage. And it came to pass that when the long years of service were to end, Jacob desired to gain an inheritance to take with him and his family. So he agreed to serve yet a few more years to obtain more sheep. And during his years of service, Laban had agreed to give to Jacob any sheep that he would cull out of his flock. So in this way Jacob obtained the old and injured sheep, and Laban preferred the white wool over the spotted sheep. And he agreed that Jacob would have the spotted sheep for his labor. And Jacob knew how to use willows as an element of righteousness, because willow feels that what is trash to men is a treasure to Anokeesed. And Laban considered the spotted sheep to be trash. And in this way Jacob's sheep increased. And when it was time for his years of service to be over, his sheep had multiplied. And when the agreed upon time for the service of Jacob was to end, he packed up all his family and possessions and set out with a long caravan toward Hebron. And he did not know it, but Rachel had taken 2 of her father's idols with her. The one he used for safety when traveling, and the other he used to see that his flocks would prosper. And when Laban returned home from a journey, he discovered that his idols were missing, and that Jacob had departed, and he followed after them. And he was angry when he approached to confront Jacob. And Jacob said, "Why have you accosted me in this way? I know of no one who has stolen your idols. Let the person who has stolen your idols die. Search all my stuff." And Laban did so, and he did not find his idols, and so he left. And when Jacob arrived home, it was a grand celebration. A word had come to Hebron that Jacob was returning home at long last. And Esau was there, and he looked out and beheld the caravan arriving, and he was utterly amazed at the sight. And when Jacob dismounted, Esau said to him in greeting, "I stand reproved for all the things I said, for I did not consider you could prosper." And Esau was amazed at all his brother had accomplished, and all was forgiven. And the 2 men embraced, and Rebekah was well pleased and praised Anokeesed. And Esau said, "The Lord God has been with you, and the blessings said upon us have come to pass." And soon after their arrival, Abraham received word that Jacob had found his rightful companion, and he called Jacob to come to him. And the 2 of them spoke together all through the night, and Jacob recounted to him what had happened on his journey home at Bethel. And he said that he had stopped there to fulfill his promise, that if he lived to return this way again, he would give his life in service to Anokeesed. And he described how the Spirit of the Most High, Anokeesed, descended down upon him, and how he was nearly overcome with his presence. And he told of how, in the midst of it, an angel hailed him as grandfather. And he felt the angel embrace him, and it was so wonderful that he felt his soul had come home. And he did not want the rich embrace to end. And that night Jacob and Abraham slept beside one another, just like Yaatsekawd did with Enoch. And in the morning Abraham laid his hands upon Jacob and blessed him. And he laid the tablet of Gabriel and the Urim on Jacob's lap, that were in the box of his mother's womanly things. And he said, "With this bestowal I pronounce that you are a son of salvation under my hand." Reference number 68. In chapter 5, we find that Abraham gave Jacob the Urim and the tablet after Jacob committed to repenting for his sin of polygamy. And Jacob inquired of him to learn how to use the Urim and how to read the tablet. And he was taught by Abraham, and Jacob returned home, and Abraham died. And all his house mourned for him, and during the 7 days of mourning, Jacob cut off his hair in grief. And when it was over, he examined the Hebrew treasure, because that is what Abraham had called it, and he handled the Urim. And it came to pass that Jacob went out alone with the Urim to find out if he could see. And the Lord appeared to him before the Urim and said to him, Bring the tablet to this quiet place and look with Urim after you have purified yourself by sevens. And in your repentance, wash yourself in the fountain of Nakash, and I will show you great things. And Jacob prepared himself according to the words of the Lord, and he looked with Urim, and it was the Urim of Shari, the son of Melchizedek. And he saw all that Yaatsekawd had done, and he discovered the rich meaning of the tablet, and he said, Lord, this is Jeshurun, the pathway of righteousness. This is the fulfillment of the covenant of Gabriel. Where your children can find their way back home to you, have I inherited the covenant from our first father Yaatsekawd? Surely, Lord, you must find a man who is worthy for such an inheritance. And Jacob wondered what he was to do with what he saw. And the Lord showed him the flame from the lamp that was on the rock on the bottom of the left-hand side of the tablet. And the Lord said, The rock under the lamp represents the one who called you grandfather. And the oil in the lamp is the presence of Anokeesed in creation. And the flame is the law of Jeshurun that Yaatsekawd established. And this lamp represents the establishment of Jeshurun by Yaatsekawd. And as you see, it is founded upon the edge of eternity. And Jacob said, What is it that I am to do? Must I reestablish Jeshurun? For surely it has been lost. And the Lord said, No. It has been established forever by Yaatsekawd. Your task is to build it into the fabric of all creation, to protect it and preserve it so it may act for itself there. And thus it will be held by the Eerkodeshiy, and the earth, and by the lights of heaven, and all the host of evil cannot overcome it. If you place it there using the elements of righteousness, in the same way Yaatsekawd did, and the pathway back to Eden will be in the light of the sun, and in the waving grasses blown by the wind, and in the enduring faith of the hills, and it will be the sweet waters of refreshing. And because you shall build the law into all creation, your third name shall be Jeshurun. So you shall have 3 names, Jacob, Israel, and Jeshurun. And the name Jeshurun will be the signal to the alliance of heaven, that you are to be under their watchful care. And the wicked will be blind to see Jeshurun in all things. So yours is the greatest task of all, and the heaviness of the war will come upon you. So be strong in your repentance, and walk steadfastly in the pathway you have seen, even as your father Abraham has done by covenant. And then and there Israel entered into a covenant all alone with Motsah the lamb, to walk in the law and be steadfast in his tasks before the Lord. And he knelt before the Lord, and into his soul came rich wisdom and a firm confidence. And Rachel conceived Joseph in the days following. And it came to pass that Jacob grew in the Lord, and his family was enlarged as the years went by. And Jacob began to ponder how he would do the ceremony, and where would be the best place. And he remembered Bethel, and all that had occurred there with the Lord, and he decided to do it on the anniversary of his encounter with Anokeesed there. And he prepared to go to Bethel. And as I have viewed Bethel, it is on a high brow of a hill, overlooking the Jordan Valley, and grass there is sparse, and water must be carried far, so people seldom went there, and it would be a place that would be undisturbed and private. And he set out to arrive in time, and do the ceremony on the proper day, even though Rachel was with child with Benjamin. And because of the jostling and the hardship of the journey, Rachel came early to her time of delivery, and the circumstances were such that they had no midwives. And Rachel died before him there, and this evil had come upon him to burden him, as he approached to perform his task before the Lord. And Jacob was utterly undone, as he blamed himself for her death in many ways. He was the one who planned the time of travel, and it was his fault, because he was the father of the child. And most of all, he blamed himself because he had caused the death of the one who had stolen Laban's idols by saying, "Whoever has taken the idols, let them die." And I do not believe she died for this reason, but it was hard for Jacob to dismiss the curse. And the baby survived and was named Benoni, reference number 69, Strong's number 1126, the son of my sorrow. And for Jacob, Benoni became an unavoidable reminder of all his part in his grief. And the inhabitants of Shakath celebrated their success. And we ended the session with the Urim on this tragic note. And when we next looked with Urim, I am seeing Jacob, and he is repenting mightily before the Lord, and he is brokenhearted, and he is asking the Lord to forgive him for the timing of his ceremony, to have it at a time near the travail of Rachel. And the Lord reminded him of the knowledge of Shabuah. And he informed Jacob that when he stopped at Bethel, it was on the day of instruction, and when he returned and had been embraced by the angel of the presence. It was also on the day of instruction in Shabuah, and he said that had rightly selected the day. And I know that it was the evil host of Shakath that caused his hard trials. And Jacob knew of the alliance of heaven because he had been informed by his grandfather. And Jacob repented for not asking for help and protection from the alliance before he left for Bethel, and he never forgot that lesson. And before he ventured to perform any task from the Lord, he would invoke the protection of angels from the alliance of heaven. And the Lord taught him many things that day, and the Lord said, "The mother of Abraham was selected to be stolen away to avoid the testimony of Shabuah from going to another generation. And Shabuah was the foremost testimony of her life, and was that which she loved the most about Anokeesed. And she could not teach her son of salvation about Shabuah, because Terah would fly into a rage at the mention of the word Shabuah. So she worried that if she taught him, he would come into danger. And she lived out her life until her last day, and watched him enter into the covenant between her hands, being unable to share her most precious knowledge until those closing moments. Now Melchizedek was ever faithful, and he kept all the weeks of Shabuah faithfully. And he always prepared for the day of instruction, and Abraham was taught it by him, and ever after he was faithful to keep it again. But your father Isaac did not have any inclination for it, and he did not keep it every year. And when Jacob had looked at the tablet of Gabriel with Urim, he saw Shabuah, but did not know when it was to be observed. And in this way the Lord tried to comfort Jacob, but he was never comforted all his days, and evil triumphed in this matter. And it came to pass that Jacob buried his Rachel in the place where she died, because he was too heartbroken to travel on. And according to the instructions of the Lord, he planned to wait another year. And as Jacob was grieving, he said to the Lord, "O Anokeesed, how can I prepare?" And Motsah the lamb appeared before him. And Jacob recognized the Lord to be the angel of the presence who had embraced him, and the presence of the Lord brought healing to him. And Motsah said, "Be of good comfort, for Melchizedek has taken upon himself to act in your behalf, because of the fornication that has been thrust upon you, and he and his wife have engaged the alliance of heaven in your behalf in ever-increasing ways. So be strong, little son, and your Rachel is with the holy ones, and she is happy because she has blessed Anokeesed with her life service. And I have bequeathed upon you the star of Eldah that is shown upon the center of the tablet of Gabriel, and it is the Urim of the presence. And all that comes by Urim throughout the entire course of the earth will first be for the benefit of your seed, and all those who walk in the law of Jeshurun in Israel, and all who ever look with Urim under my hand will come to benefit the house of Israel. So be strong, little son, and I will prepare you for your task." And it came to pass that Jacob prepared all that next year, and he received assurance from the Lord that Joseph was to be the next son of salvation, and he could plainly see that the war was against the child. And he determined to come strongly to his aid and support, and he made Joseph a coat of many colors, with each color representing a waymark of the law of Jeshurun. And he taught him carefully from an early age all that he had been taught by the example of Abraham, and by what he beheld by Urim. And Joseph was obedient before his father, and walked gently upon the earth before all men. And all the hosts of Shakath arrayed themselves against the child, and he was hated by some of his own brothers and sisters. And Jacob called upon the alliance of heaven to watch over the child, and our little crippled high priest named Israel. Reference number 70, Strong's number 3478 and 8280, which name means Anokeesed will prevail, faced all that came against him with sure determination and innocence of heart. And he is the hero of heaven, and he watched over Joseph with diligence and the power of righteousness. And when the time came for the day of instruction, he brought his son and family to the altar of Bethel, and from where they stood, one could see far down into the Jordan Valley, and into the misty distance beyond Mount Pethach. And Bethel was well suited for privacy, because no travelers came that way, for lack of a pathway down into the valley. And I saw them again as I had seen before, standing in a line from east to west, facing to the north. And before them was Mount Pethach, where Shem's altar of Shabuah was, and he performed the ceremony as it has been written. And Israel used the trump of Shabuah to summon all the Eerkodeshiy, so he could instruct them. And Leah blessed the altar and danced with Dinah and her sisters. And Leah was now the mother of Benoni, who was a babe in arms. And I beheld the ceremony once again, and I had not grasped the significance of it all that time. And Israel installed the law of Jeshurun in all creation, moving from one waymark to another, from the first to the last, even in the same manner as Yaatsekawd. And here is the account as it has written. Reference number 71, verses 76 through 91 are a quote of Kahee, chapter 3, verses 68 through 91. And it came to pass that after he prayed, Israel sounded the trump of summons to all the Eerkodeshiy, and he proclaimed that Asher would be the element of righteousness, to represent our visions of created purpose as they apply to us. And the first waymark, U, of Messiah to his father, would result in the law of virtue, bringing you to be honest and happy and good before the Lord in all his intentions for you. And he asked the Eerkodeshiy to accept the first waymark of Messiah as a part of the fabric of all creation, and it was so. And Israel sounded the trump again, and he told the Eerkodeshiy that Simeon would be the element of righteousness, so that the second waymark, the spirit of Messiah to his father, would result in the law of virtue, allowing you to always have the spirit to guide you in being virtuous. And he asked the Eerkodeshiy to build the spirit into all the fabric of creation in behalf of you in Messiah, and it was so. And it came to pass that Israel, by the strength of his hand, sounded the trump of summons a third time, and he proclaimed that Gad would be the element of righteousness for the third waymark, protection of Messiah to his father, that it would be the foundation of the pathway back to Eden, for by the way you would always live under the protecting hand of God, but without the way you would live to view days of violence. And he declared that all the Eerkodeshiy would be his witness to this decree, and build the gift of protection that Messiah had given to his father for you into the fabric of all things, and it was so. Now Israel bestowed names upon his son that were from the beginning the element of righteousness. And he knew the vision of Joseph. And Joseph, because of his vision, was dear unto the heart of Israel. And because he was the son of his salvation, Israel had a coat of many colors prepared for Joseph. And he used him and his coat as the element of righteousness to declare his covenant Thus Joseph represented to Israel a surety that Messiah, who hailed him as grandfather, would come in the flesh among his people, to give them abundant life as the living water. And Israel placed the coat upon Joseph and sounded the trump, and the Eerkodeshiy drew near. And Israel declared with the strength of his heart with tears that Joseph would be the element of righteousness, that the fourth waymark, the living water of Messiah to his father, would be the foundation of the way back to Eden, so that you would by Messiah have life, and have it more abundantly. And he declared to all the Eerkodeshiy that the living water would be always a part of the fabric of creation in your behalf. And it was so. Now after Joseph was thus used to call forth the abundant life that comes from the law of virtue, Israel sounded the trump for the 5th time to summon all the Eerkodeshiy. And he used Issachar as the element of righteousness to establish that the 5th waymark, atonement, Messiah gave to his father would result in the law of virtue bringing forgiveness of sins to you by repentance for the remission of sins. And he decreed before all the Eerkodeshiy that the forgiving grace of Messiah would be built into all the fabric of creation, and it was so. And it came to pass, Israel blew the trump of summons for a 6th time, and he used Judah as the element of righteousness to establish that the 6th waymark, power of Messiah for his father, would bring the law of virtue forth, so you could be loved by God in spite of your sins, and by your keeping in the holy pathway, God would be justified in loving you thus. And he asked all the Eerkodeshiy that they would always call you into remembrance before God, so that you would always be found to have the means of receiving the love of God, and it was so. And Israel took the lad, Benoni, and he stood him forth. Reference number 72. Leah was holding him. And he put a reed scepter in his little hand, and he sounded the trump for the 7th time, and called forth the Eerkodeshiy to use his son Benoni as the element of righteousness. And his mother was not there to see him, and Israel wept. And he established that the law of Jeshurun would be among all the fabric of creation, so that the 7th waymark, glory of Messiah to his father, would cause that you would, by keeping the law of Jeshurun, always find yourself in such a state that God could reveal himself to you according to your need, and the Eerkodeshiy agreed to do so. And Israel sounded the trump to the Eerkodeshiy for the 8th time, and he caused Joseph to once again step forward as the element of righteousness before the Lord, and he stood before the altar. And Israel declared to all the Eerkodeshiy that the 8th waymark, the resurrection of Messiah to his father, would be upheld by the establishment of the law of Jeshurun, so that Messiah could bring you forth from the dead to stand before God. And thus also you could be renewed in this life by forgiveness, and find the happiness of forgetting sin and affliction, and become whole before him in the purity of renewal. And he decreed that the newness of the life of God would be built into the fabric of all creation, and it was so. And in this thing Joseph was again the element of righteousness, as when he was discovered alive. It was like unto a resurrection unto his father. Now it came to pass, Israel used Joseph 2 times before the altar, and would not suffer Dan to step forward and become the element of righteousness, as he beheld that Dan would choose the lying vision of Semihazah, and be like unto a poisonous serpent. Wherefore, because of the song of Chavah, the altar could only be used in relation to the Lord, having all things according to his will, in that it was likened unto a mild and harmless serpent. And it was Dan who conspired to kill Joseph, and he was the one who had killed the kid, and soaked the coat in blood to be taken to their father. It was in this way that the vengeance of Dan was indeed likened to a poisonous serpent. For all his doings caused death in the family of Israel, and much grieving. And Israel grieved many long years, because of the doings of this man Dan. But the doings of the Lord are profound, and Joseph stood in this case in behalf of a son he would yet have, whose name would be Manasseh, and which name is the element of righteousness. And it came to pass that Israel sounded the trump for the 9th time to summon all the Eerkodeshiy, and he used Levi as the element of righteousness to call forth and establish the law of Jeshurun, so that you could benefit from the 9th waymark, bread of life, of Messiah to his Father, and be attached in your soul unto all the living. And thus Messiah, by the law, gave to you the bread of life, or that is to say, the life of the Messiah in all element, to be a holy joining before God, and the Eerkodeshiy agreed to do so. And Israel sounded the trump yet again the 10th time, to use Reuben as the element of righteousness, to call forth and establish the 10th waymark family of Messiah to his Father, that you, by keeping the law of Jeshurun, could always be a part of the family of God. And he implored the Eerkodeshiy to write the way into all things, so that you would stand in kinship before God in heaven, and it was according to his word. And Israel sounded the trump for the 11th time, to herald the 11th waymark, to endure, of Messiah to his Father, which is for him to be with you in your struggles. Thus he used Naphtali as the element of righteousness, to establish the law of virtue in all things, so that you would always prosper in your family, and be victorious in your struggles, and find peace in the law of virtue, and a refuge in perfection of way. And he requested that the Eerkodeshiy build into all things the success of your life struggles, by your keeping the law of virtue. And Israel sounded the trump for the last time, for the 12th waymark, Zion, Messiah gave to his Father, so that by the holy pathway you could dwell with God in community, and the holy city could be your resting place. And he decreed forever that by his people keeping the law, they would dwell with God, and it was so. Thus he used Zebulun as the element of righteousness before the altar of the Lord, to call forth Zion among his people by the power of the law, which Zion was called Maween in the days of Yaatsekawd. And in the spirit of his excitement, the Lord said to me, "This is a marvelous thing to behold, is it not?" And I knew that I had not always been able to comprehend what it all really meant. And I said, "O Lord, how is it marvelous? Please explain it to me." And little did I realize the grandeur of that which he was about to teach me. And the Lord said Yaatsekawd had to find Jeshurun to bring it forth. But when Israel put the law of Jeshurun into all things, he defined the pathway back to the Father, not just for mankind, but for all creation. And now, because of Israel, the air you breathe and the wind knows the pathway back to the Father, Anokeesed, and the trees, and the grass, and the hills, and even all the Eerkodeshiy know it by heart, and they cling to it steadfastly. And the straight path of righteousness intermingles now with the 4 spirits of life in creation, and that intermingling causes great and profound things to take place, such as could never have been known upon the earth. And now, because of that which Israel has done, Chavah is able to invite the man that Anokeesed became, who is Motsah the Lamb, to enter into all things when Olam was being transformed into Eden, to become one of the 4 spirits of life in creation. And the law of Jeshurun enabled him to enter in, because Jeshurun became his pathway in the flesh. And this is because he kept the law with perfection of way, and he loved his enemies, and treated them in the manner that Abraham covenanted to do. And he himself kept the covenant of Abraham. And Motsah prayed for those who acted despitefully, just as Edad did for Sarai. And he healed the brokenhearted, like it has been established in the 5th waymark of forgiveness. And Motsah was gentle with all people, and he magnified the covenant of Abraham in every way, And he said, "Put down your sword," even as Iddah had her son to covenant to not have weapons. And so, as a son of salvation, Israel enabled the messenger of salvation to enter into all things, because he put Messiah's pathway in place for him to go there. And he accomplished another marvelous thing when he put the law of Jeshurun into the Eerkodeshiy, which are the righteous elements of the earth. And because it was a recognized pathway established by Yaatsekawd, heaven was able to record all the times throughout the course of the earth that mankind would cry to be forgiven. And they are kept in heaven to be recorded in the book of life. And those cries accumulated and grew so strong that they generated the force that allowed Motsah to be born of a woman as the Son of Man. And so great were the things that Israel did, that no man knows the extent of them. And he is the elder son of salvation, that stands holy before Motsah the Lamb, who is our Messiah. And thus we see that while Gabriel established Jeshurun to bring it into definition, Jacob put the law into all creation, which is signified by the lightning strike, on the waymark of salvation. And the intervention required by the holy order there will be a strong invitation for mankind upon the earth to leave their sins behind and join with the flowing waters of life in their salvation. And when the man that Anokeesed became was born of woman in the flesh, the degrees of Anokeesed, as announced by the lightning and thunder, form that which is found in the book of life. And the book of life will be known to be the truth. And in this way, at the last, all the pleas for a Savior will come to be known and fulfilled. And because Israel installed the law into all creation, the Eerkodeshiy are the guardians and keepers of the law. And in this way, the righteous pathway became a natural part of the conscience of man to know right from wrong. And not only this, but by Jacob placing the pathway back to Eden into all creation, he made it possible for all righteous mankind to participate in the second decrees of creation. And that decree says, all the doings of creation and all the affairs of man's salvation must be done by man through the power of the intervention of their agency. And now are not all these four things marvelous? And after all this, little Benoni was named Benjamin. Reference number 73. Son of the right hand, Strong's number 1144. By his father, because the days of his sorrow were gone, as shown by his triumph over evil. And it came to pass that after Israel had done all these marvelous works of righteousness, all heaven burst into praise that he had performed this task. And they had been breathless in their anticipation of just what he would do. And the realization of just what he had done swept through heaven like a joyous wave. And it reached into Eldah before the face of Anokeesed himself. And none of the sons of Israel except Joseph could understand to take seriously what their father had done. And some of them wanted him to hurry and get finished with his proclamations of the waymarks. And two of his sons said to one another, "He is making me do this." And it was Levi and Simeon. And he refrained from using Dan because of his anger. And so from among the sons of Israel, Shakath began to find a way to bring the war into the midst of the praises of the heavenly host. And some of Joseph's brothers were jealous of the coat of many colors that was given to him by his father. And the reality of the pathway of righteousness was before the face of heaven, and the alliance of heaven triumphed on that day. And the hosts of evil had to make new plans and were justly subdued. And we will soon see where they took their evil plans in their efforts to destroy Israel and the law. And it came to pass that one day Levi and Simeon were herding their sheep, and there was a young man named Shechem, reference number 74, Strong's number 7927 and number 7928, to get up early to carry a burden on your shoulders, who came courting their sister Dinah. Reference number 75, Strong's number 1783, one who danced the song of Chavah. And Jacob had 10 daughters, and Dinah was the eldest, and Shechem was a righteous man. And he loved Dinah, and his father was Hamor. Reference number 76, Strong's number 2544, number 2543, from number 2560, to Dob with pitch, from number 2564. Bitumen. Bitumen refers to atonement because it is used to make a container able to hold the living water. And Dinah loved Shechem, and Hamor and his wife invited Dinah to come over and visit them. And while she was visiting, Simeon and Levi herded their sheep past the agreed-upon boundary. And Shechem came out to speak with them, and he asked them politely to leave and return to their own area of pasture. And Levi was angry, and Shechem said, "Our father has agreed upon this landmark as a guide as to where we pasture our sheep. Your side is here, and our side over there." And Levi said, "Our fathers are not in charge of our sheep." And he came at Shechem with the intent of harming him. And Shechem repelled him easily. And Levi was greatly humiliated, for he often boasted of his strength, and he returned home in his anger. And it was not according to the covenant of Abraham that he should have weapons, but he had a sword hidden in his dwelling place. And Levi and Simeon went out and fought with Shechem, and Levi killed him, and disputes over pasture was also not according to the covenant of Abraham. And Levi came home, and he made a lie, and he said that Shechem defiled their sister Dinah, and they went and got her from Hamor's house. And Dinah was very distraught, and in the midst of her many tears, she said, "Father, Shechem did not defile me. I was at his parents' house with them, and oh, Father, Anokeesed told me that Shechem was my rightful companion. How can I live?" And the matter was a hard blow upon Israel, and the covenant of his father was broken before the eyes of the people, and he was seen as a man of dishonor among the inhabitants of the land. And it came to pass that Israel felt compelled to move to Bethel, for no man could claim pasture there, because of the nature of the land there. And when they were settled into their new encampment, the daughters of Israel came all together to stand before their father, and they said, "Father, how is it that our brothers can take wives from among the people round about, but we cannot? And now you have been dishonored by your sons, and no man will court us. What is to become of us?" And his daughters wept before Israel, and were in sore distress. And indeed word was spread abroad among the people of that countryside, that no man should court his daughters. And Israel was afraid, because there were many who were angry, and they knew Israel had no weapons, and it was common for the people round about to believe in revenge. And the situation for Israel was such that he had to dwell in Bethel until he removed to go into Egypt. And when the drought came and provisions were in short supply, Israel was the most affected and the most in need, and he had to send his sons to distant places to find pasture. And as you know, Joseph was sent out to visit his brothers there, and Dan and Levi would have killed him, but Reuben, Judah, and Naphtali intervened, and they sold him into Egypt to save his life. And Levi and Dan swore that if anyone would reveal this secret, they would be killed. And they brought home to their father the bloody coat of many colors, and his life was made more bitter yet. And the war on him was hard for him to bear up under. And I was amazed at all that came before me with Urim, because it was hard to behold the severity of all that evil brought against Israel in their efforts to destroy him, and I wept. And when Joseph went to Egypt, it is known that he offered good service to Pharaoh by interpreting his dreams, and Pharaoh made him to be numbered among his agents that were charged with building granaries to store grain during the 7 years of plenty as indicated in his dreams. And Joseph's lot was to build granaries in an eastern district of the land of Goshen. And there were a large number of such agents performing this throughout Egypt. And where Joseph worked was on the border of Goshen, where the road from Canaan entered Egypt, and much provision was put by for 7 years. And it came to pass that when the 7 bad years began to be shown upon the land, all the Egyptians bought grain with their money. But when their money ran out, they had to buy grain by charging it against the tiles of their land. And this required Pharaoh to have lawyers to record the transactions. And as time passed during those 7 years, little by little, Pharaoh began to personally own much of the land of Egypt, and all the farmers became tenants on their own lands. And Joseph began to be in charge of selling grain in Goshen, and he was not a lawyer, and because he knew the language and the people of Canaan, he prospered in his position, and the people coming from Canaan bought grain with money. And it came to pass that Israel began to have want in his household, and it began to be severe because he dwelt in Bethel, where the land was poor. And some of his sons were loath to dwell at Bethel, and they often delayed their return home from their far pastures, where they could provide for their father. And some had married women where they were herding their sheep, and they did not have on their minds the welfare of their father and mothers. So Israel sent 3 of his sons to go into Egypt to buy grain, and it was Reuben, Judah, and Naphtali. And when they came, they of necessity came to the place where Joseph oversaw the selling of grain on the road from Canaan, and they came with money. When Joseph saw them, he recognized them immediately, and he knew his father's position, because he lived in the region of the drought, and he was expecting to see them one day come to buy grain. And he was hoping to see them again, and his brothers were astonished to have him approach them to speak with them, because Egyptians had disdain for Canaanite shepherds, and they did not know who he was. And Joseph bowed himself down to them, and he said to them in their own language, I am your brother Joseph. And they looked intently upon one another's faces, and the 3 men knelt also together with Joseph, and Reuben wept for joy, and Judah openly praised the Lord. And others there wondered what was causing the disturbance among the buyers. And the Egyptian clerks stood by and watched, and stopped from their measuring out the grain. And the brothers stood up and embraced each other. And Joseph asked them about his father, and they replied, He has been in good health, but he has thought you were dead, and he has grieved daily this long time, ever since you left him to go on your errand. And we are not to reveal that you were sold into Egypt. And Joseph answered such cruelty, Who made you swear? And they said, Dan and Levi. And after he ate with his brothers, and their grain sacks were measured and full, and after they had paid for them, Joseph said, I will allow you to take 1/4 of your grain home, so you will be compelled to come back and bring our father. And so they were obedient to his directive, and they returned home with only a part of their provisions. And when they arrived home, Reuben could not wait and ran ahead. And he burst into the presence of his father, being breathless. And he said, Father, Joseph lives, and he is alive, and we saw him. And Israel had kept the coat of many colors, and he had washed it, and he kept it around his shoulders every evening during his prayers. And he did this ever since he had lost Joseph. And Israel was moved at the news. And he stood up and asked to be told of the account of their seeing him. And Reuben rehearsed all the story, and how Joseph was sold, and of the deceptions of Levi and Dan. And Israel said, Is there anything that shall prevent us from going to him? I am a pariah in my own country, and my daughters have no husbands, and there is no pasture for us here in Bethel, and we have no food for our little ones, and Joseph is alive. Gather up the people and let us go to Egypt. And they carefully planned their journey for the sake of all the women and children and their flocks and their old people. And it came to pass that the company of travelers halted on the border of Goshen, and Israel sent Reuben ahead to inquire as to the mood of the people there. And Joseph informed Pharaoh that his family had come, and he asked permission for his family to dwell in Goshen, seeing that Pharaoh now owned the land there. And he told Pharaoh that they were shepherds, and their trade would benefit the people in Goshen, and Pharaoh allowed them to live in Goshen. And the reunion of Israel and Joseph was rich in expressions of comfort, and Dan and Gad had families elsewhere in Canaan and did not go into Egypt. And Levi was ashamed and defiant before those in the house of Joseph, and he would not dwell among them. And it came to pass that when they were all settled into their dwelling places, Israel called his family together, and he said, Had all my children been faithful to live by the law, my house would have become a holy nation in our own country. But now we must become a nation in the face of the evils of the world in this land of Egypt, where the law may be hard to keep. And he said, I counseled all of you to be careful to be faithful to Anokeesed, and to not indulge in the pagan gods of the Egyptians. And in your walk here, do not forget the tenets of the covenant our father Abraham made with Anokeesed under the hands of his mother. And do not walk in the evil paths of the world, as some of you have done, so it will be well for us here in Goshen, and we can remain to be Anokeesed people in the covenant. And Israel began to be old, and he called his sons and daughters to come to him so he could tell them that which would befall them at the end of their sojourn in the land of Egypt. Now Israel lived in the house of Joseph, and he said, Come near now, my children, and hear my words, and be obedient to my counsel. And first he addressed his daughters, who by this time some of them were married, and he said, My lovely daughters, it has been of much distress to me that you have been brought to this place, and I have been pained of heart that you have been troubled over your future in obtaining families. And I would counsel you to be careful to keep the first 2 waymarks of Jeshurun, so the Spirit can guide you, and you will do well to be instructed by the first foundation of Chavah, to see that you obtain your rightful companions in the eyes of Anokeesed. And I want you to know how important it is to be ever faithful to the sanctity of marriage. For the evil ones would like to exclude you from Israel, but if you will be faithful at the last day of our sojourn in Egypt, Anokeesed will bring you into the fold of our people by the sanctity of your marriages. And all will be restored to you that your fathers have intended, and be sure to move only with the guidance of his Spirit, and in honor of who he created you to be, as you seek your rightful companions. And Israel turned his face toward his sons, and he said, Reuben, you are strong, and you have been diligent to safeguard the desires of your father and the will of Anokeesed. And if you will teach your children to always walk in the sanctity of marriage, and if you will make known to them the trials you have gone through because of your sin, after our sojourn in Egypt, your children will be the most numerous. And the Most High is well pleased with you, and know this day that you have been forgiven, and stand clean and pure before him. And you are my firstborn, and came to me in the moments of my triumphs. And you have every intention to walk in the way of Jeshurun, and you will rejoice in the days ahead as you stand before Anokeesed, and you will be remembered as a true son of Israel. And then Israel turned to address Simeon and Levi, and everyone became silent. And a hush was felt in the room, and he said to them, You are brethren in your ways of life, and instruments of violence are to be found in your dwellings, and this has not been according to the covenant of my fathers. Let my soul come not into your secret counsel. Let not that which Anokeesed has revealed to me be united with your assembly. For in your anger you murdered, reference number 77, Strong's number 2026, slew, killed, murdered, referring to the time they killed Shechem. See Genesis chapter 49, verse 5 through 7. A man, and in your self-will you destroyed the pathway back to Eden before the face of all the people. Cursed be your anger, for it was fierce. Cursed be your wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide you out of my family. And the Most High will scatter you out from among the children of my house, And you will have no part and be banned from leading my people Israel in the day that they return from Egypt into our own land. And these 2 men departed out of the house in their anger, and they dwelt no more in Goshen. And Israel wept, and he said a prayer, asking Anokeesed to try to find a blessing for them in the way they would go. And then he turned to Judah, and he said, My son, be strong and repent mightily for your sins with Tamar. And from you will come those who hold the scepter of judgment, and a lawgiver will arise in your midst, and the scepter will not pass out of your hand until Messiah comes, and then unto him will all the people be gathered. Reference number 78. See Genesis chapter 49, verse 9 through 10. And your heritage will be great, because your offspring will assist all those who gather unto him. And you are he whom all your brethren will praise. And it will come to pass that Messiah will be known as the Lion of Judah. And he asked Issachar to draw near to him. And Issachar knelt down beside the bed of Israel, so he could listen to his father to honor him. And Israel said, Issachar, you have been strong in standing up for the Lord, and your seed will serve him in a special way. When the people leave Egypt to return home, and your children will carry as a heavy burden the sins and strayings of our people, both in their journey in Egypt and when they are gone out to go home. And you will see and behold with your eyes 2 burdens. Reference number 79. Genesis chapter 49, verse 14. Issachar is a strong ass crouching down between 2 burdens. And you will carry the burdens that Motsah the lamb carries. So be strong and walk with dignity, to be so honored as to be one who is charged with coming to his aid. Motsah carrying his 2 burdens. See Revelation chapter 10, verse 2, and Melchizedek chapter 7, 32 through 35. And to Naphtali he said, While we are here in Egypt, you are to study all that which has been brought by from our listeners, that may come into your knowledge, for it is the truth of the ages. And you and Zebulun are to bring to the people the living waters of heaven. And you are to always walk in the sacred pathway of the law of Jeshurun. And someday the living water will cover the earth like waters cover the sea, and the truth will arise from the tablet of Gabriel to the gathered people. And he said to Asher, You are to be careful to guide the visions of your people, because in Egypt their visions can be overcome and lost. And if our sojourn here is long, it will be easy to come to walk in the way of the people here. So preserve Jeshurun among them, and you must assemble them often, to exercise a pursuit of the will of Anokeesed in all things. And he said to Joseph, You are called upon as a son of salvation to bless the land and the waters and all the Eerkodeshiy in creation, by sustaining the observance of Shabuah, all during our walk here in Egypt. And it will come to pass that Shabuah will languish here in Egypt, and one of your seed will rise up. Reference number 80. Moses. To restore Shabuah as the last son of salvation, and to bring it forth to the people of our nation. And Jacob gave the treasure of the Hebrews to him in his hands, and he said, Keep this safe here in the midst of the violent and evil world, and pray to see to it that it will safely come into the hands of the next son of salvation. And to Benjamin he said, Be careful that you do not become complacent with the ease and comfort of Egypt that you have found here, in your marriage into the family of your brother Joseph's wife, but be diligent to teach your children to stay urgent, to save the lost, and to lay hold of those who are the prey of sin, and rescue the souls of people back to Anokeesed from waywardness. And it will be easy for many in my house to become wayward if our sojourn here is long. And Israel said, Before I say on, I want to say that Simeon and Levi were used on the waymarks for the spirit and the bread of life at Bethel. And they have both dishonored the position they were given, and now their actions have made them enemies of the spirit that is in all things, oh woe is me. And Reuben, your position on the waymark was for family, and you have sustained it with honor. And the Lord is well pleased, the Most High be praised. And I see now Israel is beginning to fade, and he is speaking very quietly. And he is saying to Zebulun, your people will gather to inhabit a holy city, and Israel lay back and died. And thus the container of womanly things of Idah came into Egypt and into the possession of Joseph. And with this we ended the use of the Urim for a few days. This concludes the Book of Remembrance of Moses, the Tablet of Gabriel, Chapter 4. Shalom, family.